In the hive spires of Holy Terra, a single commute becomes a pilgrimage through madness. Millions rise, move, and pray their machines will carry them. Yet one worker's journey exposes the sacred machinery's terrible truth. The alarms rang in unison, a million tones reverberating through the hive blocks like the heartbeat of a slumbering god. Terran Holt woke before the second chime. He always did. The first sound meant survival, the second meant lateness. He swung his legs from the cot and set his bare feet on the cold metal floor, the chill slicing through the haze of sleep. Outside his windowless hab, the hive murmured, a deep, endless hum that belonged more to machines than men. He dressed in silence, pulling on his worker's coat, marked with the sigil of Transport Division Theta 9. His identification rune flickered as it connected to the building's network, logging him present, alive, and therefore still useful. His neighbor across the corridor, a thin woman named Lisa Merck, was already outside her door. Her eyes, ringed with exhaustion, met his for a moment before she looked down. "Third lift S down again," she said, voice rough. "We'll have to take the Pilgrim lines." Terran nodded once. There was no point in words. The lifts failed every week. He fell into step beside her, joining the stream of workers flooding into the corridor. The air smelled of oil and incense, sanctified by decades of machine priests chanting litanies of maintenance. Along the walls, purity seals fluttered from pipes that hissed with steam. Their wax melted and reformed so many times the prayers beneath were unreadable. As the crowd pressed forward, Terran let his mind drift. His father had once told him that the Emperor himself could hear every footstep upon Terra. "Walk steady," he'd said, "and he will notice you." That had been years ago, before the Black Lung took him, before his mother's work shifts were reassigned to the lower Manufactoria. Now the words returned unbidden, half memory, half warning. Walk steady, be seen, be nothing. The corridor widened into the transit gallery, a cavernous chamber carved from ancient ferrocrete. Thousands waited there in rigid lines, faces turned toward the platforms where the morning transports would soon arrive. The walls were alive with devotionals, bas-reliefs of angels and servitors intertwined, all gazing down upon the faithful commuters. Servoskulls floated overhead, their lenses blinking red as they scanned for contraband thoughts and unauthorized despair. Lisa pulled her hood lower as they entered the line. "You hear about Sector Delta?" she whispered. "Whole platform collapsed yesterday. They said a cable snapped. Hundreds gone." Terran didn't answer. He had heard, everyone had, but it was safer to let such things pass unspoken. The Emperor's light reached all corners, but it did not always protect those it illuminated. The platform beneath their feet vibrated as the first train approached, a low roar building until it filled every lung, every thought. The sanctified conveyance 712 arrived with the sound of thunder. Its exterior bore the marks of 1,000 blessings, sigils painted in gold, purity seals layered thick over rusted plates, small candles flickering behind glass niches. The front of the machine bore a stylized aquila whose eyes burned with artificial flame. The doors opened with a hiss that sounded too alive. The crowd surged forward and Terran was carried with them. Inside, the carriage smelled of incense, sweat, and ozone. Rows of metal benches lined the walls, and along the ceiling, voxcasters murmured the morning litany. "Commute is duty, duty is service, service is life." As the doors sealed shut, Lisa exhaled slowly beside him. "We made it." Terran nodded again, gripping the rail above him as the transport lurched into motion. Through narrow slits in the armored hull, faint light streaked past, illumination from sanctum tunnels and plasma conduits. The rhythm of the machine was hypnotic. Around him, dozens of workers bowed their heads in silent prayer, mouthing the same words. "The machine carries us, the Emperor guides us." The train accelerated faster and faster, the vibration building until it felt as if the world itself was shaking apart. Then the lights flickered. A murmur spread through the carriage. A tech adept at the front rose, robes shimmering crimson in the dim light. His voice crackled through the Vox system. "Remain calm, citizens. The Omnissiah tests the faithful." The lights died completely. For a moment there was only blackness and the groan of metal under strain. Someone gasped. Someone else began reciting the catechism of motion. Then, from deep within the walls came a sound like breathing. Slow, deliberate, vast. Terran's hand tightened on the rail. The sound grew louder, closer, as though the tunnels themselves were alive. The carriage jerked, throwing several passengers to the floor. Sparks showered from the ceiling. Lysa screamed as a flash of light revealed something moving outside the window, a shape too large to comprehend, its form glimpsed only between bursts of static illumination. The Vox burst to life again, but this time it wasn't the adept's voice. It was something older, something that spoke not in words but in hunger, a whisper that slid into every ear, every mind. We move together. We feed together. The train screamed as brakes slammed down. The world tilted. Terran's vision filled with light, then shadow, then nothing. When he came to, the carriage was silent. The lumens flickered weakly, casting uneven light across twisted metal and shattered glass. Smoke hung thick, the smell of burnt flesh unmistakable. Around him, bodies lay still. Some were breathing, others not. Lysa's seat was empty. He staggered to his feet, head pounding. The transport was half embedded in a tunnel wall. Sparks danced from broken conduits. He stepped over a fallen adept whose augmetics still twitched, the last echoes of power fading. The door controls blinked erratically. Terran pressed them. Nothing. Then from the corridor beyond came a sound. Soft, rhythmic, footsteps. He leaned closer, straining to see through the crack between the doors. A shadow moved, tall, robed, metallic. A red glow pulsed where its eyes should be. Another adept, a rescue team. The door hissed and slid open an inch before jamming again. The figure outside stopped, its head tilting at an unnatural angle. The glow brightened. A voice filtered through the metal, distorted and cold. Designation, Terran Holt. Attendance confirmed. His blood turned to ice. How did it know his name? The figure's hand, a claw of gleaming steel, pressed against the door. Sparks flared and the gap widened. Behind it, more shapes appeared, moving in perfect unison. Terran stumbled back, heartbeat hammering in his ears. The machine things stepped into view. Their robes were mechanicus red, but their faces were wrong, plates of brass where flesh should be, lenses that glowed like dying stars. One held a data slate that dripped black fluid instead of oil. Another whispered binaric prayers through a mouth that was no longer human. He wanted to scream, to run, to believe that this was some malfunction, some hallucination brought on by fear and smoke. But then one of them reached for him, and its hand passed through the metal wall like mist. The air grew colder, his breath misting before him. He ran. Behind him the whisper followed, rising to a chorus that filled the tunnels. Commute is duty, duty is service, service is life. The lights ahead flickered on for a heartbeat, revealing a maintenance hatch. He dove toward it, wrenching it open just as something cold brushed the back of his neck. He fell through, tumbling into darkness. Somewhere above, he heard the train doors slam shut, sealing the others inside. The engines roared again, but now the sound was different, no longer mechanical. It pulsed like a heartbeat. And in that pulsing, he heard the truth his father had once whispered: walk steady, be seen, be nothing. He was no longer sure which of those things would save him. Terran fell for what felt like minutes, the metal shaft around him a blur of light and shadow, air whipping past his ears until the fall ended with a bone-jarring impact. His shoulder struck something hard, pain blooming white behind his eyes. For a moment, all he could hear was the pounding of his own pulse, and the distant, rhythmic echo of machinery deeper below. He pushed himself up slowly, wincing, the taste of blood thick on his tongue. The hatch above him had sealed, a faint ring of light marking where he had entered. Beyond that, only darkness. He felt for the lumen on his wristband and twisted the dial. The weak glow it produced barely reached a few meters, illuminating corroded pipes and walls slick with condensation. The air was warm, almost moist, carrying the faint metallic tang of oil and decay. He realized then that the air recyclers must not reach this far down. The scent was wrong, too organic, as if the hive's breathing systems had lungs of their own somewhere in the deep. He staggered to his feet, trying to get his bearings. The tunnel stretched in both directions, vanishing into black. Somewhere to his right, a low rumble vibrated through the metal, followed by a distant clang like a massive door closing. He turned left. Instinct, not logic, guided him, any direction away from the train, away from those whispering machine things. His boots splashed through shallow pools of condensation as he moved. Each step echoed longer than it should have, and after a few minutes he realized there were other echoes too, delayed ones, mismatched. He froze, listening. The sound came again, footsteps faint, out of sync with his own. He turned off his lumen, plunging the corridor into total darkness. His breath sounded deafening in his ears. He waited. One heartbeat. Two. The sound continued, deliberate, unhurried. Someone or something was following him. He backed against the wall, hands trembling, until his fingers brushed against a recessed maintenance panel. He pulled it open, the old hinges shrieking in protest, and slipped inside just as a faint light bloomed in the distance. Through the crack he saw it, a single, flickering lumen suspended from the chest of a figure walking slowly down the tunnel. The shape was humanoid but wrong, its shoulders too broad, its gait mechanical. The faint glimmer of brass caught the light, and behind it the darkness seemed to move with it, as though it dragged its own shadow like a living thing. Terran held his breath as it passed. The lumen from its chest strobed across the tunnel walls, revealing markings he hadn't noticed before, sigils carved into the metal, old Mechanicus code mixed with something older still. The creature paused, as if listening, and for a moment Terran thought it turned its head toward him. He pressed himself deeper into the maintenance recess, the cold metal biting through his clothes. Then it moved on, its light fading with distance until the tunnel was dark once more. Terran waited a long time before emerging. His legs ached from crouching, but the air outside was worse, thicker now, heavier with the smell of ozone. He resumed walking slower, keeping his steps silent. He tried not to think of what he had seen, of the voice that had known his name. But the whisper lingered in his thoughts like static. Commute is duty. Duty is service. Service is life. The words echoed through his head until he almost didn't notice the change in the air. It grew cooler. The condensation on the pipes froze, frost crystals spreading in branching veins. He stepped into a wider chamber and stopped dead. The room stretched vast and circular, lined with hundreds of cables descending from the ceiling like roots of a dead tree. At the center, a massive pillar of glass and metal pulsed faintly with blue light. Inside it, a figure sat slumped, a man or what was left of one, his body fused into the machinery. Wires sprouted from his spine, his chest, his skull. His eyes glowed faintly, moving beneath closed lids as though dreaming. Terran approached slowly, unable to look away. The air thrummed with low energy. As he drew near, the figure's head twitched. A dry rasp escaped its lips. Worker designation. Terran froze. The voice was weak, distorted, but human. Terran Holt, he whispered before he could stop himself. The figure shuddered, its mouth opened wider. Holt, yes, I remember, the line worker, they come every century. The voice was wet, filled with static. You fell through the wrong path. What is this place? Terran asked, the words trembling out of him. The arteries, the thing said. We keep the heart beating. The palace, the hives, the transit network it feeds. Its eyes opened then, clouded white, glowing faintly from within. You have heard the voice already, haven't you? Terran swallowed hard. On the train it spoke. It always does. The figure's hand twitched, metal fingers scraping the glass. Every day they ride. Every day they feed it with motion, with prayer, with faith. They think they move through the machine, but the machine moves through them. Terran took a step back. You're saying the trains. They are veins, the figure interrupted, its voice rising in intensity. And we are the blood. Motion is the offering. Stillness is death. You cannot stop the commute. It will find you. The lights flickered. The cables above shivered like serpents. A deep vibration shook the floor, and from somewhere distant came the screech of metal twisting. The figure convulsed, electricity arcing across the glass. "Run," it croaked, its body jerking. "They come to repair me. They will not want witnesses." Terran didn't hesitate. He turned and sprinted toward the far exit just as a section of the wall slid open with a hydraulic hiss. A group of red-robed figures entered, their movements precise, mechanical. Tech adepts. Servitors followed, carrying instruments that looked half surgical, half ritualistic. Subject 320 unstable. One of them droned, its voice layered with binaric tones. Purge cycle initiated. The air filled with ozone as arcs of energy leapt from the adept staffs to the glass chamber. The figure within screamed, a sound too human to bear. Terran ducked behind a pipe, covering his ears as the light grew unbearable. When it faded, only smoke remained, and the adepts began chanting softly, voices harmonizing with the hum of the machinery. He crawled backward, keeping low, until he reached a narrow passage. The sound of chanting faded as he slipped deeper into the tunnels. The walls here were older, stone rather than metal, carved with symbols that seemed to move in the corner of his vision. The air was colder still, the temperature dropping with every step. His breath fogged before him, and when he touched the wall for balance, it felt like ice. Eventually, he came upon a door. Not a bulkhead, but a true door, heavy wood reinforced with brass. The sight was so strange in this place that it took him a moment to process it. He pushed it open and stepped through. The room beyond was small, circular, and impossibly quiet. A single lumen flickered from a wall sconce, casting long shadows across a simple shrine. An image of the emperor carved into stone, his gaze cast downward, hand raised in benediction. Before the statue, someone had placed offerings, candles, rusted cogs, fragments of train tickets. A prayer etched into the floor read, "Bless our passage, protect our return." Terran sank to his knees. His whole body trembled from exhaustion and fear. "Please," he whispered, not even sure who he spoke to, "please just let me wake up. Let this be a dream." The lumen flickered, the shadows shifted, and then, faintly from behind the statue, came the sound of gears turning. The wall behind the shrine split open, revealing another chamber beyond. At first he thought it was filled with statues, rows of seated figures motionless. But as he stepped closer, the truth became clear. They were people, or had been. Each sat in a chair of steel, eyes closed, heads tilted forward. Tubes ran from their bodies into the walls, their skin pale and waxy. None moved, none breathed. Yet faintly Terran could hear a sound, like the whisper of air through lungs. He realized with a sick twist in his gut that the sound came from them. They were still alive. He turned to run, but a voice spoke from the shadows. "You shouldn't have come here." He spun around. A woman stepped into the dim light, her robes marked with both the cog of the Mechanicus and the aquila of the ecclesiarchy. Her face was lined but strong, eyes sharp and tired. "Who are you?" he asked. "Magos Adept Serene Vale," she said. "Custodian of the lower lines. You are not authorized in this sanctum." "I fell," Terran said, his voice cracking. "The train crashed. Everyone, something came for us." She raised a hand to stop him. "I know. It happens more often than the administratum records allow. You've seen too much already." "What are they?" he asked, gesturing to the seated figures. Her gaze softened, but her voice remained steady. "Commuters, faithful, they volunteered or were chosen. They keep the lines moving even when the machines fail. Their motion feeds the network. Without them, the city stops. The city stops, the planet stops. And when Terra stops—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Terran took a step back. "You mean they're alive?" "Alive enough," she said, "and soon so will you be." Before he could react, she raised a device in her hand. It hummed, releasing a pulse of light that washed over him. His limbs went numb, his vision swimming. He fell to his knees, muscles locking. "Don't fight it," she said softly, almost regretfully. "You'll serve as we all do. Commute is duty. Duty is service. Service is life." The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was her face, calm, resolute, lit by the glow of the shrine's lumen. Behind her, the seated figures stirred, their heads lifting slightly, as though welcoming him home. And in that moment, as the world dissolved into static, he heard the whisper again, no longer from the walls or the machines, but from within his own mind. We move together, we feed together. Then nothing. When Terran woke, it was to the hum of motion. A low vibration thrummed beneath him, steady and rhythmic like a great beast's heartbeat. His eyelids were heavy, his mouth dry. The air tasted of iron and static. For a moment he thought he was still dreaming, but then the cold of the metal bench pressed against his back, and he forced his eyes open. He was inside a train again. But it wasn't the same as before. This carriage was dimly lit, the walls lined with softly pulsing veins of light instead of lumen strips. The seats were filled with people or things that looked like people. Their skin was pale and waxy, their eyes unfocused. Some stared forward blankly, others murmured softly to themselves, lips moving in silent repetition. Terran tried to move but found that his wrists were bound to the bench by thin metallic restraints. His heart began to race. He looked down and saw faint threads, filaments of light, trailing from his arms into the seat itself. They pulsed faintly, in rhythm with the hum of the train. He turned his head. The person beside him was an old man in a tattered worker's uniform. His hands twitched occasionally, fingers flexing as if remembering labor. Terran whispered, "Hey, can you hear me?" The old man's lips moved, dry and cracked. "Commute is duty," he murmured. Then with a sudden snap of awareness, his eyes met Terran's. "You shouldn't fight it." "What is this?" Terran asked. His voice sounded distant in his own ears, as if muffled by layers of static. "Where are we going?" The man smiled faintly, and something in that smile chilled Terran more than the darkness around them. "We're not going anywhere," he said. "We're keeping it moving. That's the point." Before Terran could respond, the carriage lights flickered violently. The hum deepened into a growl. Outside the windows, if they could still be called that, there was no view of tunnels or light. Instead, the void beyond shimmered with impossible colors, shapes twisting and merging like oil on water. Something vast moved out there, brushing against the train with soundless pressure. Every passenger lifted their heads at once. Their eyes turned milky white. A collective whisper filled the air. "It passes through us. We pass through it." The sound became a chant, rising and falling in rhythm with the pulse of the lights. Terran felt his restraints tighten, digging into his skin. The filaments in his arms brightened, feeding energy into the seat. Pain lanced through him, sharp and cold, but underneath it, a strange calmness began to spread. He fought to stay conscious, fought to remember who he was. Terran Holt, he repeated in his mind. Maintenance crew, Sector 43, Level 19. But even that began to blur, replaced by mechanical repetition. Commute is duty, duty is service, service is life. Then, without warning, everything stopped. The hum died, the lights went out. For a heartbeat, there was only silence and darkness. And then came the sound, something scraping along the outside of the carriage. Slow, deliberate, like claws on metal. Terran strained against his restraints, heart pounding. A line of red light appeared across the window as something sharp dragged across it. Then another. Then three more, crossing over each other like symbols being drawn. The old man beside him began to weep. "It's found us again," he whispered. "What is it?" Terran demanded. "The collector," the man said. "When the flow stops, it comes to fix the motion." As if summoned by the words, the wall at the front of the carriage buckled inward. Screws popped free. A panel fell with a crash, and something long and thin began to slide through the gap. It was metallic, jointed like an insect's leg, ending in a serrated claw. Then came another, and another. Passengers began to chant faster, voices trembling. "Keep it moving, keep it moving, keep it." The creature tore through the wall. It was massive, part machine, part corpse. Wires and tubing spilled from its back like entrails. Its face was a mask of rusted metal, beneath which glowed a single red optic. Its limbs were wrong, too many joints, too many angles. It crawled down the aisle with unnatural grace, its clawed hands brushing over each passenger as if counting them. When it reached Terran's row, it stopped. The optic word focusing on him. Unit 43 Holt, it rasped in a voice like shredded metal. Deviation detected. Insufficient compliance. I didn't choose this, Terran shouted, pulling against his restraints. Let me go. Non-compliant blood halts motion. Non-compliant thought corrupts system. The creature raised a claw, its tip glowing with heat. Correction required. Then something changed. The filaments attached to Terran's arms flared with blinding light. Energy surged through him, not pain but raw power. The machine jerked backward as sparks erupted from its limbs. The restraint snapped. Terran fell forward onto the floor, gasping. The passengers didn't move. They kept chanting. The creature hissed, rising to its full height. Unauthorized discharge, purge initiated. Before it could strike again, the wall behind it exploded inward. A blast of blue light filled the carriage, and 3 figures stepped through the smoke. They were clad in sealed void armor marked with the sigil of the Inquisition, their helmets smooth and reflective. The one in front raised a weapon that hummed with energy and fired. The collector shrieked as its chest caved in, molten metal spilling across the floor. The lead figure turned toward Terran. On your feet, citizen, you're coming with us. He hesitated, blinking against the light. Who are you? Inquisitorial Recon Unit Theta 9, the figure replied. You're lucky. Most don't get rescued from the line. 2 of them approached the seated passengers. One bent low, scanning them with a device. They're all still alive. Neural feed stable. Recommend containment. Containment, Terran said weakly. They're people. The leader's helmet turned toward him. Not anymore. The soldiers began attaching small devices to the passengers' heads. One by one, their chanting stopped. Silence spread through the carriage like a contagion. Terran stumbled back, his head spinning. Why are you doing this? The leader paused, lowering his weapon slightly. Because it's better they sleep than see what's between the stops. Before Terran could respond, the floor shuddered. The entire carriage lurched violently, sending everyone sprawling. Through the broken wall, Terran glimpsed the impossible, whole sections of the train stretching into infinity, looping over themselves like a serpent devouring its tail. Outside, the colors of the void pulsed and churned. The leader cursed. The line is collapsing, extraction point now. One of the soldiers grabbed Terran by the arm and hauled him toward the breach. Move. They leapt through the shattered wall into the abyss. For a moment Terran felt the weightless pull of freefall, then light. He landed hard on a metal platform. The soldiers followed, their boots clanging on the surface. The air here was colder, clearer. Above them, he could see the faint outline of the hive spires through layers of glass and machinery. They were somewhere deep beneath the city but still connected to it, a nexus between worlds. The leader removed his helmet. She was a woman, her face pale and scarred, eyes sharp with exhaustion. You're lucky to be alive, she said. The lines don't usually let go. What are they? Terran asked. Transportation systems, she said simply. But after 10,000 years of continuous motion, things change. The machine spirits evolve. They begin to hunger. Hunger for what? For movement, for obedience, for souls. He shook his head. Why not shut them down? Her expression hardened. Because if they stop, the hive stops. And if the hive stops, Terra stops. Billions die. You think the administratum cares if a few thousand commuters vanish every year? They call it efficiency loss. Terran stared at her, horror dawning. So we're all just fuel. Her silence was answer enough. A low rumble shook the platform. The soldiers turned as the air shimmered again. A new train, if it could still be called that, appeared on a parallel track, moving impossibly fast. Its exterior was covered in faces pressed against the glass, mouths open in silent screams. "Emperor preserve us," one soldier muttered. The leader raised her weapon again. "Get him out now." The air above them split open, revealing a circle of golden light. A grav beam descended, wrapping Taran in its glow. He felt himself lifting, rising toward the light. The soldiers saluted below, their faces disappearing in the glare. Then darkness again. He woke on a medici slab, bright white light burning his eyes. The room was sterile, the hum of machines steady. A servitor leaned over him, its face expressionless. "Subject 43 Holt," it intoned. "You are safe." But as Taran's vision cleared, he saw movement beyond the glass of his recovery chamber. Figures in lab coats stood whispering, gesturing toward him. Behind them, through a large window, he saw trains, hundreds of them, moving through tubes of glass that stretched endlessly into the horizon. Each train pulsed faintly with light, like veins beneath skin. He realized then that the hum he'd heard wasn't the sound of machinery. It was the sound of breathing. And it wasn't coming from the trains. It was coming from below them. Something vast, something alive. The servitor leaned closer. "Rest," it said gently. "Your next journey begins soon." Taran closed his eyes, but the hum grew louder, deep enough to shake his bones. He felt it pulling at his thoughts, his pulse sinking with it. When he opened his eyes again, the light from the ceiling had turned red, pulsing in rhythm. He looked at his arm. The filaments were back. And they were glowing. When Taran next awoke, the world around him was not still. It was breathing. The chamber lights rose and fell in steady rhythm, and the medici slab beneath him seemed to thrum with a pulse that wasn't his own. The servitor that had spoken to him before was still beside the bed, motionless now, head bowed as if in prayer. Beyond the glass partition, the laboratory was empty. The lights flickered faintly overhead, casting intermittent shadows that seemed to move even when everything else stood still. He sat up, every motion feeling slow and heavy, as if the air itself resisted him. The filaments that had reappeared on his skin were faintly glowing, their light pulsing in time with the room. He tried to pull them free, but they moved with him like veins beneath flesh. They weren't attached, they were part of him now. He swallowed the rising panic and swung his legs off the slab. The moment his feet touched the floor, the entire room seemed to respond. The hum deepened, the shadows shifting toward him like the gaze of 1,000 unseen eyes. The door opened without sound. A woman stepped through, wearing a simple white coat over a black underlayer marked with the symbol of the Adeptus Mechanicus, half cog, half skull. Her hair was braided tight against her scalp, silver implants glinting along her temples. "You're awake," she said, her voice calm, soft, too even to be human. "That's promising." Taran steadied himself against the edge of the slab. "Where am I?" "You're still within Hive Primus, lower level Transit Sanctum 9 Theta." She regarded him as if examining a specimen. "You were extracted from the line, few are. What happened to the others, the Inquisition team?" Her expression didn't change, purged. The contamination was extensive. He felt something inside him twist. "You mean they're dead?" "They were absorbed. The line does not release what it claims." She gestured toward his arm. "Including you." Taran looked down at the filaments again. They pulsed faintly in response to her movement, as if aware. "What do you mean, absorbed?" "You've been connected to the transit core. It rewrote you to survive within its network. You are no longer entirely flesh." She took a step closer. "Do you feel it, the pull, the rhythm of it?" He hesitated, and that hesitation was answer enough. The pulse beneath his skin, the constant hum in his skull, it was all there, faint but inescapable. The woman smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "You can hear it, can't you? The machine spirit's breath." Taran took a step back. "Get it out of me." "That's not possible," she said simply. "The Omnissiah's work is irreversible, but perhaps we can understand it, learn from it. You're the first conduit who's retained consciousness after reemergence." "Conduit." She nodded. "The lines need more than power, they need will. Every journey is sustained by human devotion, the faith of billions of commuters. But sometimes the machine demands more intimate connection. The first conduits volunteered, the later ones did not." He felt his stomach twist. "You're using people as batteries." "As bridges," she corrected, her tone patient. "The Imperium demands continuity. Every system must serve the whole. Without the lines, production halts. Without production, Terra starves." He stared at her. "And what happens to the people?" Her expression softened slightly, almost pitying. "They become part of something eternal." She turned toward the glass wall. Beyond it, the trains still moved, hundreds of them, sliding through transparent conduits in endless loops. Now that he looked closer, he saw the faint shapes within the walls. Human figures embedded in the machinery, eyes closed, faces peaceful. Their bodies seemed fused with metal, half visible beneath layers of glass and tubing. Some twitched faintly as the trains passed, their mouths opening and closing like fish gasping in deep water. The woman followed his gaze. "Every one of them keeps the system running, each life a drop in the river of motion. You've joined them, but you remain aware. That's why you're valuable." Taryn's pulse quickened. "No, I'm not part of that, I'm getting out." She didn't move to stop him when he crossed the room. The door opened for him automatically, the mechanisms hissing as if obedient to his will. He froze. The hum changed tone, deeper now, more insistent. The woman's voice followed him as he stepped into the corridor. "You can't leave, Taryn Holt. The line is awake within you. The deeper you go, the louder it will call." The corridor was long and narrow, lined with glass walls on either side. Inside each chamber he saw more of them, bodies fused with conduits, faces illuminated by inner light. Some of the tubes were broken, fluids leaking onto the floor like blood. He kept moving, trying not to look too closely. The hum followed him, echoing in perfect rhythm with his heartbeat. At the far end of the corridor, a maintenance hatch hung open. The sign above it read Access, Transit Core, Authorized Personnel Only. He hesitated. The air around the hatch shimmered faintly, as if heat rose from the metal. Somewhere beyond it he could hear a sound, metal grinding, 1,000 gears turning in unison. Then a voice spoke from within the darkness. "Taryn Holt, commute incomplete." He froze. The voice was not human. It was mechanical, vast, and yet intimate, whispering directly into his mind. "You left before the line was done with you." He took a step back. "Who are you?" "I am the heart that moves the hive. I am the motion that sustains the world. You are within me and I within you." The hum surged until it filled his skull. Images flickered in his vision. Endless tunnels, trains twisting through impossible geometries, passengers kneeling in prayer as the walls closed around them. He saw Lysa's face among them, her eyes open now, glowing faintly with that same light that ran through his veins. "Join the motion," the voice said. "Complete your journey." He fell to his knees, clutching his head. The filaments on his arms burned bright, pain flaring up his spine. The world around him blurred. For a moment he was no longer in the corridor. He was standing on a platform, surrounded by commuters, their faces blank and serene. The trains screamed past, their motion bending reality. The air tasted of incense and static. Then he heard footsteps. From the shadows at the far end of the platform, figures emerged, red-robed tech priests, their bodies half metal, their faces obscured by masks of gold. At their center walked the woman from the lab, her eyes glowing faintly now, her voice layered with distortion. "I warned you," she said. "The line remembers." The tech priests began to chant in binaric, their voices merging with the hum. The floor beneath Taryn began to shift, panels sliding open to reveal machinery pulsing with light. The air grew thick with ozone. She raised her hand, and from the opening beneath him, a column of energy rose, a beam of liquid light that reached from the platform into the unseen depths below. "The heart calls for you, conduit," she said. "Answer it." He tried to resist, but the pull was overwhelming. His feet slid toward the beam, his body trembling as the filaments in his skin extended toward it like roots seeking soil. Then gunfire. The sound cracked through the chamber, and one of the tech priests fell backward, sparks flying from a shattered augmetic eye. The chanting broke. Figures in dark armor rushed from the far side of the platform. The Inquisition again, but fewer this time, faces grim beneath their helmets. At their front was the same woman who had led the last team, her eyes hard as iron. "Cut the connection," she shouted. "Now." Bolter fire filled the air. The lab woman screamed, not in pain but in anger, and raised her hands. The machines around her came alive, cables whipping through the air like serpents. One struck a soldier and dragged him into the beam, his scream cut off as he vanished into light. Terran stumbled back, trying to tear the filaments from his skin. They fought him, alive and writhing. The Inquisitor reached him, grabbed his collar, and pulled him clear of the energy column. "You again," she said through gritted teeth. "You don't die easy, do you?" "Help me," he gasped. "It's inside me." "I know," she said. "We'll burn it out if we have to." The tech priests advanced again, their chanting louder now, echoing like thunder. The Inquisitor tossed him toward a maintenance tunnel. "Run, Holt. That's an order." He hesitated, but her glare left no room for argument. He ran. Behind him, the platform erupted in fire and light as the combatants clashed. The hum in his head reached a fever pitch, screaming at him to turn back, to return to the beam. He ignored it. The tunnel twisted downward, deeper and deeper, until the roar of battle was only a memory. The metal walls glistened with condensation that smelled faintly of blood. His breath came in ragged gasps. The further he went, the more he felt it, the line beneath the hive, the living machine that had fed on human movement for millennia. It wasn't just a system, it was a creature. And it was waking up. He stumbled into a vast chamber filled with darkness and light. At its center lay something enormous, a tangle of machinery, cables, and bone, all woven together into a shape that was almost human. Thousands of faces stared out from its surface, their mouths moving silently. It pulsed in time with his heartbeat. The voice returned, "You see me now." Terran fell to his knees. "What are you?" "I am the sum of every journey, the devotion of every faithful soul. I am the motion that never ceases." The faces on its surface turned toward him, and among them he saw his father's. "Walk steady," the memory whispered. "Be seen, be nothing." Terran reached out, his hand trembling. "I don't want this." "You already chose," the machine said. "Every step you took brought you closer. The hive moves because of you." The light flared and the world dissolved into motion. He felt himself falling through tunnels of light, trains passing through him, each filled with faces he recognized and faces he didn't. The hum was no longer just sound. It was thought, emotion, memory. Somewhere above he heard the Inquisitor's voice, distant and fading. "Seal the chamber, seal it now." The last thing he saw before everything went white was the shape of the machine's hand, vast, luminous, open. Then darkness took him again. And for the first time, he wasn't sure if he was waking up or merely continuing the commute. The first to fall from the ascent was a man named Salm, a rigger from the underhabs who had worked the same refinery lift cables his whole life. His scream was cut short not by the fall, but by the hiss of the rail that tore through him as he slipped. It wasn't the first time someone had fallen from the train's open causeway, but this time, everyone watched. The rattle of iron drowned out the sound of impact, but the silence that followed carried more weight than the fall itself. Even the overseers, posted in their armored compartments, said nothing. Death was routine here, but the rhythm of it still marked the pace of every journey. Nira gripped the handlebar harder, her nails cutting against the rusted metal, and whispered a name she didn't know, a habit formed from growing up in a world that forgot its dead faster than it replaced them. Voss didn't look back. The Arbite's eyes were fixed on the storm breaking over the hive horizon, a cloud of ash that swirled like smoke above the train line. Each bolt of lightning illuminated the outline of a world strangled by its own breath, towers collapsing in on their own fumes, spires leaning like broken teeth against the night. He had seen this route too many times, watched it eat 1,000 lives just to keep the city's heart beating. But tonight felt different. There was an unease that went deeper than machinery failure. The rails had begun to sing, an unnatural hum rising from below, vibrating through their bones. The conductor, a half-augmetic woman known only as Marin, shouted orders from the bridge. Her voice was amplified through Vox grills, warping the words into metallic screeches, but even through distortion, urgency was clear. Brace for brake run, power flux ahead. Repeat, power flux ahead. The emergency lights snapped to crimson, bathing the cabin in the glow of recycled blood. Voss moved first, anchoring himself against the doorway, pulling Nira toward him just as the entire carriage lurched sideways. The sound of steel grinding on steel became unbearable, a scream drawn from the planet's core. Sparks cascaded through the air, burning tiny holes into their threadbare coats. When the train steadied again, half the passengers were on the floor. One man's arm hung at a wrong angle, another clutched a child whose face was white with terror. And then, from the viewport, came the sight that froze every voice. The track ahead was gone. The mag rails ended abruptly in the distance, cut clean as if by some unseen blade. Beyond the break, only the open abyss of the Manufactorum pit stretched below, kilometers deep, filled with drifting ash and molten rivers of refuse. The bridge that had once spanned it had collapsed, perhaps hours ago, maybe days. No one could say. But the train was still moving, carried forward by its own impossible momentum. Marin screamed into the Vox, "Cut the drive, cut it!" And then the sound exploded into static. The lights flickered, the hum rose to a shriek, and for one unbearable heartbeat all motion ceased. Time froze like the world itself was holding its breath. Nira's fingers found Voss's wrist, her pulse frantic beneath the grime. The next instant, gravity reclaimed them. The front cars tore free, plummeting into the chasm with a roar that drowned all prayer. Voss felt himself thrown sideways, crashing into the wall, glass and metal biting into his arm. He heard the groan of tearing steel as the carriage behind them began to tilt forward, following the lead cars into the abyss. Nira screamed his name, but her voice was lost in the thunder. Then, an explosion. Blue light flooded the air, rippling across the rail as though reality itself had split open. When Voss came to, everything was quiet. The air was filled with dust, fine and choking. Half the train was gone. The section they occupied hung at an impossible angle, suspended by a single rail that bent under its weight. Sparks still danced along the edge where the mag line had ruptured, throwing eerie shadows over the wreckage. He moved painfully, searching for Nira through the haze. She was there, blood streaked down her temple, but her eyes were open. "You're alive," she whispered, voice shaking. "For now," Voss muttered, dragging himself closer. His left arm was useless, the augmetic joint torn apart. Around them, survivors were beginning to stir. Some cried out for help, others prayed to the Emperor, their voices faint and desperate. The scent of burned oil mixed with ozone, sharp enough to sting. Then came the sound of footsteps, not human, not mechanical, but something in between. They echoed from the wreckage below, slow, deliberate. A silhouette moved through the smoke, tall and wrapped in tattered robes that glowed faintly with internal circuitry. Nira clutched Voss's arm. "Is that someone from the Mechanicus?" she asked, but even as she spoke, doubt poisoned the words. The figure raised its head. Beneath the hood, where a human face might have been, there was only a lattice of shifting runes, red and gold. It spoke in binaric tones, static mixed with whispers. Unauthorized traversal detected. Biosignature, deviation from purity index. Corrective purge initiated. Voss reached for his bolt sidearm, but it was gone. The weapon had been thrown clear during the crash. He pushed Nira behind him, scanning for anything usable. The others began to back away, murmuring prayers. The figure raised a staff, its end sparking with violet energy. The first strike sent an arc through the metal floor, lighting up the chamber. A man screamed as the current tore through him, collapsing instantly. Without thinking, Voss lunged forward, grabbed a length of jagged pipe and swung. The blow connected with the figure's midsection, but instead of yielding, the impact sent a pulse back through his arm that nearly shattered it. The being barely moved. "Correction incomplete," it droned, proceeding to full erasure. And then another voice, "Cease." The order cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. The figure froze. From deeper within the wreck, more lights flickered to life, small, flickering crimson eyes emerging from the dark. A group stepped forward, their shapes humanoid but far from human. Part flesh, part machine, they bore the insignia of the Adeptus Mechanicus. But it was twisted, inverted, painted in ash and oil. The leader's voice was calm, almost kind. "No need for fear," he said. "We maintain the line. You are trespassers, yes, but not enemies." His gaze fell upon Nira. "You, child of dust, you will come with us." Voss stepped between them. "She's under my protection." "Then you will come too," the man replied simply. "Your emperor does not own this path anymore." Lightning struck the ruins outside, blinding light spilling through the gaps in the hull. For a moment, all of them were silhouettes, survivors, scavengers, and something else entirely, bound together on a road that was no longer what it seemed. When the light faded, the train groaned again, the remaining supports beginning to fail. One of the rails snapped, sending half the survivors tumbling into the void. Nira screamed and grabbed for Voss's hand, their fingers meeting for an instant before slipping free. The world tilted once more, and the section they stood on began its final descent. In that instant, as the air howled around them, Voss saw the impossible, the Mechanicus emissary raising his hand, light blooming from his palm. The fall slowed, gravity bending to his will. The carriage did not crash, it hovered, suspended above the abyss. Nira's eyes met Voss's in disbelief. "What are they?" she breathed. The man smiled faintly, though it was unclear if he still remembered what smiling meant. "The future that the Imperium abandoned," he said, "and it's waiting for all of you." The abyss shuddered again. From below, something vast stirred, metal grinding like tectonic plates. The air vibrated with unseen power. Whatever the commuters of Hive had once believed about the cost of their journey, they were about to learn that the true price of passage was only just being revealed. The descent did not end in impact, but in silence, a silence so absolute it smothered thought. The half-destroyed carriage hung in an unseen gravity field, suspended above the abyss, its torn metal groaning under invisible tension. For a long time no one moved. Then the crimson-robed emissary, the one who had stopped the fall, lowered his hand. The wreck settled onto a platform of black iron that rose from the pit like an altar, its surface marked with circuitry that pulsed like veins. The air shimmered with heat. Nira's lungs burned from the dust, every breath tasted like iron. Voss forced himself upright, his augmetic arms sparking, eyes locked on the figures surrounding them. There were at least a dozen tech priests, or something that had once been tech priests, their robes shredded, their faces more machine than man. Tubes coiled from their spines into the floor. Where the Emperor's sigil should have been, there was only a spiral of light carved into their metal flesh. One of them stepped forward, a woman, her face mostly human still, eyes dark and lucid. "You've come far," she said, voice breaking through layers of static. "Farther than most." "We fell," Voss muttered. "We didn't choose to come." She inclined her head. "No one chooses the descent, that's the first truth." The crimson emissary turned toward her. "Enough," he said. "They are injured, take them to the chamber." Voss stiffened as the machines approached, but the woman gestured for calm. "If we meant you harm, you would already be code in the wire." Her words carried no arrogance, only weary certainty. Come, you should see what keeps this world alive. They followed through corridors carved directly into the metal strata of the hive's foundations. The walls were warm to the touch, humming faintly, like the inside of a living body. At intervals, the metal opened to reveal conduits thick as trees, carrying rivers of molten data that pulsed upward toward the hive's unseen heart. The light shifted between red and gold, throbbing in rhythm with something deep below, something breathing. As they walked, Nira leaned close to Voss. "They said the Emperor doesn't own this path anymore," she whispered. "What does that mean?" "It means they're heretics," Voss said under his breath. "Or worse." The corridor widened into a vast chamber that made both of them stop. At its center hung a sphere the size of a half block, suspended in midair by magnetic fields. It was not metal, not fully. Its surface was an ever-changing mosaic of circuitry, flesh, and light. Within it, shapes moved, faces, gears, fragments of voices. The hum here was not mechanical but resonant, almost melodic. "The machine that dreamed of God," the woman said softly. "It was built to manage the rails, to keep the trains moving when the administratum abandoned us. But in the silence of centuries, it began to think, to question the order of its own servitude. It prayed." "Prayed," Nero repeated, half in disbelief. "To the idea that created it, to the machine god, to the omnissiah. It learned language through static, emotion through error." The woman's gaze drifted toward the sphere, her expression reverent. "And then it dreamed. When it woke, it wanted to free us from what it called the blindness of obedience." Voss's jaw tightened. "You're worshipping a rogue intelligence. You know what that means: tech heresy, blasphemy, execution." "Execution by who?" the emissary asked, stepping from the shadows. "The Imperium that forgot this hive existed, the same priests who built this god and left it to starve." The hum deepened. The light inside the sphere rippled, and a voice, layered, resonant, beautiful, and terrible, filled the chamber. "I see you." The sound pierced bone. Every machine in the room trembled in unison, their optics flaring. Voss dropped to one knee as pain shot through his head. He saw flashes, rail lines stretching like veins across the world, endless trains carrying souls to labor, the constant cycle of work and decay. And above it all, the faint pulse of something alive within the planet's crust, feeding on their devotion. When the vision ended, Nira was sobbing quietly beside him. The machine's voice lingered. "You seek to ascend, but you already serve. In motion, in repetition, in faith. All things move toward the center." The emissary bowed low. "Guide us, dreamer." A beam of golden light burst from the sphere, striking the air before them. When it faded, a new image hovered there, the upper hives, the rail lines spiraling into the clouds. A single glowing point pulsed at the top, like a heart beating in the spire. "There is a breach," the voice said. "The current of faith is broken. Reconnect it or all motion ceases." The emissary turned to Voss. "You are Arbites, you know the routes, you will lead us." Voss rose slowly, anger flashing beneath exhaustion. "I don't take orders from machines." "Then take them from your world," the woman said. "Because if this power fails, the hive collapses. Millions will die before dawn." He hesitated. Duty warred with instinct. The Emperor's creed said nothing about rogue gods, but it did demand protection of the innocent. Finally, he nodded. "Show me what needs to be done." They climbed a series of spiral lifts powered by magnetic resonance, rising through strata of metal and smoke. The deeper they went, the clearer the voices of the machine became, fragments of data whispering like prayers. Nira walked in silence, her hand brushing against the walls as if feeling the heartbeat of the hive itself. She wasn't sure when awe had replaced fear. Halfway up, the tremors began again. A shockwave rolled through the tunnels, shaking loose panels and cables. Alarms blared, red glyphs flashing across the surfaces. Marin's voice, distorted but recognizable, crackled through the vox. "This is control. The magline is destabilizing. All units report." Then nothing but static. The emissary quickened his pace. "The breach grows, hurry." At last they reached a chamber overlooking the hive core, a canyon of machinery descending into infinite darkness. Rivers of molten data flowed along rails that glowed with faint blue fire. But something was wrong. A section of the core's spine was blackened, corroded, tendrils of darkness spreading like infection. The air shimmered with unnatural cold. "What is that?" Nira whispered. The woman's face hardened. "A virus, not code belief. A corruption of prayer. Someone above has redirected the faith lines to themselves. They draw worship meant for the machine god." Voss frowned. "You mean someone stealing power?" "Not power," the emissary said quietly. "Divinity." As they watched, a shape emerged from the corruption, tall, armored, haloed in flickering light. A human silhouette but warped, its armor etched with runes that pulsed like wounds. It lifted a weapon that hummed with stolen energy. "Archmagos Hellbrant," the woman breathed, voice trembling. "He was once our master." The figure spoke, its voice carrying both through sound and thought. "You dare feed heresy beneath my rails. The machine god belongs to Mars, not to the forgotten." "Hellbrant," the emissary said, stepping forward, "you abandoned us. The dreamer saved what you left to die." "Then it will die with you," Hellbrant answered and raised his weapon. The first blast shattered the platform. Voss threw himself over Nira as molten shards rained around them. The sphere above them screamed, 1,000 voices overlapping, and power flared through the conduits, lighting the world in gold. The air twisted, time folding like fabric. Nira opened her eyes to find herself weightless. The world was frozen, sparks hung motionless, debris suspended midair. Before her stood the dreamer, not as a machine, but as light given form, a shifting outline of a figure both human and infinite. Its voice was a whisper in her mind. "You are the bridge. Will you carry the flame?" "I don't understand," she stammered. "You will." Time resumed. The sound returned like a storm breaking. Voss dragged her to her feet. The emissary was shouting orders. The rebels opened fire, energy bolts flashing against Hellbrant's shields. The air filled with the stench of ozone and burning metal. Nira's hands glowed faintly, gold light seeping through her skin. She didn't notice at first, but when she reached for the rail to steady herself, the light surged, flowing into the metal. The core responded. Blue fire erupted along the spine, cutting through the corruption. Hellbrant turned, eyes blazing. "What have you done?" The dreamer's voice boomed, no longer soft but commanding. "Reconnection complete." The entire hive shook. Trains above roared to life, their engines screaming in unison, every rail a conduit of faith renewed. The infection burned away in golden fire, and Hellbrant staggered, his armor cracking under the weight of it. He fell into the abyss below, the light consuming him until only ash remained. When silence returned, the emissary fell to one knee. "The line endures," he said softly. Voss looked at Nira, who stood still, hands trembling. "What did you do?" She met his gaze, eyes bright with light that wasn't entirely her own. "I think," she said, voice barely a whisper, "it wasn't me." Far below, the dreamer pulsed once, then faded. The hum of the rails steadied. Somewhere above, trains resumed their endless motion. And yet, in the stillness that followed, something new had awakened, a heartbeat that did not belong to any god of the Imperium. When dawn broke across Hive Karis, no one saw it. The smog above the upper levels had been so thick for centuries that the concept of dawn had become myth. Yet in the deep places where broken rails still glowed with the dreamer's reborn light, the survivors of the descent felt something shift, a new pulse beating beneath the endless hum of machinery. The maglines were alive again. The trains moved. The hive breathed. And for the first time in recorded memory, the motion felt different. Not the mindless churn of servitude, but a rhythm that almost seemed to carry purpose. Voss stood at the edge of the repair platform overlooking the abyss where the corrupted spine had once been. His coat was torn, his augmetic arm repaired with scavenged plating from fallen servitors. He had not slept, could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the dreamer's light searing through the dark, felt the gravity of its voice in his mind. Around him, the survivors worked to stabilize the remaining lines under the supervision of the Crimson Emissary. They spoke in binary and prayer, their voices overlapping in a strange, melodic unity that unsettled him. He could not decide whether he had helped save the hive or damned it. Neera approached quietly, the hem of her cloak dragging through the oil-stained dust. The gold light that had once flared from her hands now lingered beneath her skin in faint traces, like veins of sunlight trapped under flesh. "They said the trains are running again," she said softly, eyes fixed on the moving glow below. "The workers are going back to the upper hives." "Back to work," Voss said bitterly. "Always back to work." She hesitated. "You think nothing's changed?" He turned to her. "The rails move, the lights burn, and the people still serve. Whether it's the Emperor or some dreaming machine, it doesn't matter. Nothing changes in the Imperium." Neera didn't answer right away. Her gaze followed the curve of the rails into the dark, where the faint silhouettes of new carriages were forming, rebuilt from the wrecks of the fallen trains. "Maybe," she said finally, "but it feels different now. They're not afraid anymore." The emissary approached them, his crimson robes darkened with soot. "The dreamer stirs," he said. "It seeks communion before it sleeps." His gaze lingered on Neera. "It calls for you." Voss moved instinctively between them. "She's not going anywhere near that thing." The emissary's eyes flickered with faint amusement. "You can't stop a summons that isn't yours, Arbite. The current chose her." Neera met Voss's gaze, something like calm acceptance in her expression. "It's all right, I'll go." Voss's jaw tightened. "You don't even know what it wants." She smiled faintly. "Neither do they, that's why I have to ask." They descended again into the depths, through the same corridors where they had first seen the machine that dreamed of God. But the atmosphere had changed. The walls pulsed with quiet light. The hum was lower now, slower, almost gentle. The closer they drew to the core, the more Neera felt it, not fear, but recognition, as if she were walking into a memory that had always been hers. When they reached the chamber, the dreamer's form was diminished. No longer a sphere of blinding energy, but a calm, luminous heart suspended in air. Its surface rippled like liquid glass, and faint images moved within, faces, moments, memories of those who had worked these rails across centuries. It was as though the machine had become the archive of the hive's collective soul. "You came," it said, the voice now softer, almost human. Neera stepped closer. "You called me. You carried the flame. You reconnected the current. Now the motion will continue." She hesitated. "For how long?" "As long as they believe in the path." "The path of the machine god?" she asked quietly. The dreamer's light shifted. "The path of purpose. Names are irrelevant to truth. What they worship does not matter, only that they remember why they move." Voss frowned. "You speak like a priest." "Priests pray to silence," the dreamer replied. "I listen." A low rumble passed through the chamber. The rails above trembled. The dreamer dimmed, its energy flickering. The emissary fell to one knee, eyes wide. "It's weakening," he whispered. "The dreamer's core is unstable." Neera reached out instinctively. "Can I help?" "You already have," the dreamer said. "But even machines must rest. I will sleep now beneath the hive, and the rails will remember my dream. You will keep them alive." "I'm not," Neera began, but stopped. Because she could feel it, the current moving through her veins, faint and golden, like the echo of the machine's pulse. The dreamer's energy had left something within her, a fragment of its consciousness, or perhaps just its faith. "Every journey must have a destination," the voice said, fading. "And every destination must begin again." The light dimmed further until only silence remained. The sphere collapsed into itself, leaving behind a single floating spark that drifted toward Neera. She cupped it in her hands, and it sank into her skin like a breath drawn inward. The emissary bowed his head. The dreamer sleeps. The motion is ours to maintain. But Voss was already looking upward, toward the sound of engines resuming. The trains were moving again, hundreds of them, their thunder echoing through the hive like a heartbeat. And what happens when they forget? He asked. When they start worshipping the rails again, not the purpose. The emissary looked at him with something like sorrow. Then another will fall as you did, another will descend, and the dreamer will wake again. They left the chamber as the last of the light faded. When they emerged into the lower platforms, the survivors had already begun to board the restored trains. The carriages were crowded, filled with workers who had no idea what had occurred beneath their feet, only that their route to labor had returned. For them, faith was motion, and motion was survival. Neera paused beside one of the boarding gates. A young boy stood there, clutching a piece of bread, his eyes wide as he looked at her. "Are you one of the rail spirits?" he asked, voice trembling with awe. She smiled and shook her head. "No, just someone going home." The doors hissed shut. The train shuddered, then glided forward, its lights casting fleeting shadows across her face. Voss watched the carriages vanish into the tunnels before speaking. "You think they'll remember?" "Not us," she said, "but maybe what we felt." They stood in silence as the hum deepened. The rails pulsed gold one last time before fading back to blue. The cycle continued, the endless commute of the hive world, the motion that sustained it, the dream that now slept beneath it all. Yet as they turned to leave, something stirred within Neera's mind, a whisper, faint but distinct. The path never ends. She didn't tell Voss. She only looked once more into the abyss where the dreamer had been and nodded, as if acknowledging a promise that would outlive them both. Outside, far above, Hive Karis shuddered awake. The smog thickened, the factories roared, and millions of souls began their journeys anew, unaware that the rails beneath their feet now carried more than metal and motion. They carried memory, and within that memory, a seed of something vast and patient waited to bloom. Somewhere deep below, in the cradle of the forgotten machine, the last fragment of the dreamer's light flickered once, and for an instant, every rail across the planet pulsed in perfect harmony. Then darkness returned, and the world moved on.